we look at the past, I would hope we can get inspired by looking at the craftsmanship and looking at the details and long to build better because we see beautiful things like this. We talk about design influences, and we've been following along with who were the architects, who was doing stuff. This is kind of the Greek Revival period. The big guy was Benjamin Latrobe. And we have all these other guys who are still practicing in this era and who are still building things. Okay, Ithiel town is someone who is who we're going to focus on here. He goes to Asher Benjamin's building school in New York and trains under Asher Benjamin, goes back to New Haven, Connecticut, and really starts his career there. But all of these guys, I don't want to pass these up that, oh, those guys were Greek Revival. They're still practicing. Robert Mills is into the 1880s, 60s or 70s. Thomas Walter practiced for a long time. So all these guys are still practicing. They're just not as famous for the Gothic Revival and these other styles. And what I really find, I don't remember you remember us talking about this, but the national capital, okay, really goes through a huge transformation in this time period. This is them getting ready for the Lincoln inauguration, okay? So it goes from a timber frame building, okay, very small, that was designed by Charles Bulfinch about 1820, so that 30 years later, you know, it's a steel constructed dome, it's twice the size because they've got all these states and all these new representatives coming in. And so the Capitol just, you know, explodes. Here again is a small picture of what's happening in America. Now, what that means is that there's a split in focus in architects. And really, Ithiel town focuses more on commercial things because he's more of an engineer. And A.J. Davis focuses more on residential things because becomes much more influential residentially than he does commercially. So this is the first split. There's a second split that happens later in the 20s where architects are kind of choosing their side. And Ithiel town and Robert Mills and some of these other guys mostly do civic buildings. And we'll see that. And then these other do residential stuff. And it's because of the rising middle class that these guys are gaining an influence through writing and everything else. So Town and Davis, right? Ithiel Town and A.J. Davis were the most famous architecture firm in America at this time. And they were the first ones to really start making money. I alluded to that before, is that, Charles Bulfinch, I mean, it's kind of sad to read his story because he just couldn't get a break and never made money. And, you know, it was very difficult to make money as an architect in America early on. It's really 1830, 1840, rise of the civic buildings, the rising of Washington. Ithiel Town and Davis do a lot of state buildings in Indiana and North Carolina. And so you see these guys rising up and finally making it. These guys are very wealthy. Ithiel Town is stupid rich, and for good reasons too. So he was kind of the engineer. As I said, he trained under Asher Benjamin. He goes back to New Haven, Connecticut, builds a couple churches there. We'll look at one of them in the Gothic Revival at a fairly young age. He patents a bridge. Okay, it's called the Town Lattice Bridge, which basically allowed people to cross rivers and kind of build a bridge kit, for lack of a better word. And I'll show you more about that. But he gets rich because of that patent. And anyway, he's the senior member of the Town and Davis group. He hires Davis when he sees Davis's drawings, and that's very important. But Ithiel Town is on his way out as Davis and Downing are on their way in. What? Someone say something? One of his first houses that's kind of a Greek Revival, right? Not necessarily Gothic or anything else. This is 1810. This is the church he did in 1813. Obviously, very Gothic Revival, right? And then the other church he did on the same was a very James Gibbs, very traditional. And so he could design in both styles. He was people appreciated him for his engineering mind more than for his design mind. You don't really see a problem with his designs there, but he was much more famous for being an engineer. Now, his lattice bridge was basically, the idea was that instead of having these main beams that go across, you had a lattice system, right? Where you could basically take boards and run them all together and basically create a bridge. You had a couple piers in there, but it was self-supporting, and the lattice kind of held everything together. If you're going to come late, you're going to have to...
I know you guys were doing this. Here, carry on.
So we got this lattice system that he invented, and these bridges were being built in Europe. This one's in Salt Lake City, I think. And so, one of my first jobs in was I was a school teacher in South Kent, Connecticut, teaching English and coaching soccer. This is Bull's Bridge, right by where we lived, and this was a lattice bridge made by Ithiel town. So it's still in use. They've done a concrete bottom, but the sides and the roof are still part of the structure. So he was very influential, and he was collecting patent money from this design. He updated, he improved his design in 1835, but he is basically now at the tail end of his career by 1830 when he and Davis start getting together. And so anyway, this is what made him famous, and this speaks to his engineering mind. A house he did obviously in the Greek Revival style. They did a number of civic buildings together, and this is really more towns thing, but this is the North Carolina State Capitol. This is the Customs House in New York. So they were architects for about 6 years. The Wordsworth Athenaeum, this is obviously speaking to the Gothic style, right? So you see that Gothic building is now a museum, and this was his personal house, and here resided the greatest library in America, maybe in the world. They've said his library was better than John Soane's. So once he started getting money from his patent, he started traveling to Europe, he started collecting books. And when I was doing the research, they'd write about his books, and there was never a clear inventory of what he had, but it's thought he had 11,000 volumes, okay? My library right there has like 3,000. So if you want to get an idea of how big it was, it would have come out to here, all the way back in there. Just a tremendous number of books. John Soane, who was an architect in London, was said to have the best library. His was said to be better than that. So he was a collector. He was trying to figure out where to give it. He ended up giving a lot of his library to Columbia. But anyway, very, very jealous, personally, to have seen that library and to see what he was doing there. This was a painting, Thomas Cole, remember the romantic artist, painted by Thomas Cole for Ithiel town, architect, showing the different styles, Gothic, the Greek and all the different styles. There's Egyptian back there. Apparently Ithiel town didn't like this and didn't accept it. Not sure what's going on with that. But that was Ithiel town. Now, Alexander Jackson Davis, he's his partner. And the way they became partners is A.J. Davis went to art school. And his art teachers were basically telling him, you don't want to be an artist. You need to be an architect, because he kept gravitating to art buildings and designing things. And so he goes to town and says, can I do some renderings for some of your projects? And town goes, yeah, let me look at them. And sees them and goes, okay, yeah, why don't we become partners and start working together? And so they become this very influential architecture firm. He writes a book called Rural Residences, which we'll look at. He's most famous for the Gothic Revival. He does some Italianate stuff. And then later in his career, he works with Andrew Jackson Downing, okay, who's the horticulturist, and it's Downing who really explodes the style and is really the promoter. So this is the Customs House he did with Town in New York. But this is his book, okay? So Rural Residences, I think this is 1840. You might not look at it, but this is significant, okay? Why is this significant? Well, the way he is picturing the house, okay? The way he's showing that with the landscape and the shading and the drawing. Remember, I don't know if we remember talking about Bullfinch and some of his drawings. They were really crude. In fact, we don't have really many drawings from their era. And certainly detailed drawings of elements and details aren't found. And so we know that, and we'll compare them to his Asher Benjamin drawings, but this was an incredibly artistic way of approaching design. And look what he also does here. Explanations, estimates, and a specification. Now, this is the real split that you see happening, that we go from the master builder who controls the job and handles all things to the architect who writes specs that tell them how to build, right? So this is monumental, okay? This is big, right? The roles have flipped. The architect's gone from someone who can't make money to someone who is designing and defining what houses should look like. It's crazy. This would be examples of the houses, right? That you'd have rooms laid out. There's rooms that he has furniture layouts in these things. But these would always be accompanied with a specification. But who's he appealing to here, right? It's not the builder, it's the homeowner, right? And so he is, again, the focus now has been that the homeowner is remember the rising middle class, right? They get to determine what they're building. And he is, I mean, there's a guy with a stroller there, right? And so no builder wants that in their picture. So this is him promoting this lifestyle. Notice too that it's in the country, okay? That is not, in the city, right? That you have, that landscaping is very important. And Downing, who writes a book on horticulture, which basically fruit trees, is a bestseller, right? Let me say that again. Fruit trees is a bestseller, right? It's kind of crazy, but it speaks to the interest of the homeowner at that time and what he was interested in, what he was learning and doing. But again, you're seeing Gothic Revivals things. Gothic Revival, there's an Italianate house coming up. This is one of his Italianate houses from the book. This is where it got built, right? Winya, I guess that's how you say that. It's about 1840. So he was mainly doing in the Gothic Revival in the Italianate styles. Blandwood Mansion, Italianate, right? You see the tall tower. You see the not heavy bracketing underneath this, but certainly in that style. And then this is, of course, Lyndhurst. This is one of his famous Gothic Revival houses on the Hudson River. He did about 3 houses in a row. Obviously very high style. Able to do a bunch of different things here that were crazy. I don't know if you guys have ever heard Lewellyn Park. It's in New Jersey. We were really lucky to have a client call us, and he had bought a house in Lewellyn Park. 1920s, it was a colonial revival house. I go there, and this is in the park, right? Driving through here, and Alexander Jackson Davis, I'm going to screw that up all night. So A.J. Davis, I'll just go with that. This guy basically buys this tract of land just outside of New York. It's in New Jersey. And he basically creates this park because A.J. Davis is so influential and because he's doing so much stuff. He has Davis design this whole thing. So when you drive in the gates, you see, rustic little gazebos like this. There's benches and chairs all over this place. It is a park, okay? This is the suburbs, right? This is the new suburbs. We're not in the city, we've gone out to the suburbs. This is the first development that influences developments for 100 years, right? So Lewellyn Park is a huge deal as far as the first time in America where you begin to see things like this. This is the gate to Lewellyn Park. I mean, it still looks very similar to this. There wasn't a horse-drawn carriage, though. But it was very idyllic, right? It was very beautiful to drive through. You wind up through these hills. It was very hilly, and all of a sudden you come to these little vistas. It was amazing what he had done in that short period of time. So, design books change, okay? And this is where we see a split. This is important because we're talking about the 2 changes that happen, design changes and building changes. And just to finish up the design changes, we're going to notice the difference between these design books and what's happening. This is Asher Benjamin's book, 1830, okay? Rural Residence is 1840, okay? Asher Benjamin's, Menard Lefevre, their books go out of print in 1850, okay? Very popular for a time period, but the important part, because they're written to builders and because they're interested in the Greek Revival style, they are very mechanical, okay? compare that, right, to Davis's drawing of a house, right? I mean, this is what a builder, I don't need all that crap. I just want the, just the guts and bones, and I just need to look at, right? That's what this house is. It follows Palladio's ideas as far as the proportions of the room, right? And then basement, all the basement, kitchen, 17 by 21, right? It's just the hard facts. This is not a book for homeowners, right? This is a book for homeowners, right? And so you have this builder's pattern book to the house pattern book and this changing of who controls what design is. Builder pattern books were very concerned with the orders, right? They're concerned with picturesque drawings, right? They're wanting to convey this idea of what this house is. Very symmetrical. These designs tend to be asymmetrical. This was only classical, only Greek Revival, only Federal. You didn't have the Gothic or Italianate. This was for builders, this is for homeowners. So we have a change that's taken place in design in this short period of time, and it's overwhelming. The design influence, Ithiel Town, he's an engineer. He focuses on these things, and there's a lot of interest in an engineer architect at this time period. A lot of state capitals being built and things like that. He's the artist, he's the residential side, and then he's the horticulturist. Front porches, I talked about those. Front porches weren't around before these guys came around, right? The front porch was very important because they were talking about the inside and the outside of the house. Specifications, I talked about that. Growing cities. Downing is the guy who inspires Central Park, right? Downing dies very early. Olmsted, Frederick Law Olmsted, Downing was his hero, right? And so Central Park gets put in place because of Downing. The DC Mall, he came up with a plan to change the DC Mall from this European garden where it's very straight line and very ordered to this, jungle, rustic, rural thing. It didn't get ended up doing, but you can see his plans for it. It's fascinating. That speaks to the level of influence he had as a tastemaker and everything else.